Hello and welcome. Today in this reflection, I will be exploring heresy, what that word actually means, why it arises, and what it might invite us to notice about the way we held our own perceptions. There's nothing here you need to agree or believe. I will walk you through the 5 perspectives on heresy, and I'll let you decide what it resonates. The word heresy comes from the Greek word hairesis, which meant selection or a school of thought you chose to follow. Independent thinkers like the Stoics and the Epicureans gathered around a set of ideas they found meaningful. As Christianity moved from a distributed, diverse movement into an institutionalized structure in the early centuries of the Common Era, something changed. Choosing differently became choosing wrongly. Asking honest questions became a form of disloyalty, and curiosity became something to restrain when rigid structures became the norm. This is a pattern that is common in institutional structures of religion, particularly in the West. I'm not saying that all Western religions have this, but it is worth keeping in mind. By the 4th century, when the Roman Empire entwined with the Church, heresy had become a crime and a threat to political order. The same logic granted mystics, scientists, and visionaries like Galileo, Giordano Bruno, and Joan of Arc. This was a way for institutions to protect their own boundaries. And that same logic has a very consistent pattern across history, which we will look at through the 5 perspectives. From a psychological perspective, heresy has almost nothing to do with moral failure. What it describes is the collective response when shared beliefs are threatened, when someone inside the group begins to perceive differently. It creates anxiety, and that anxiety is expressed as making accusations against the heretic. The terror management theory, developed by Ernest Becker's work, offers a useful frame here. Human beings will construct worldviews as buffers against the existential Human beings will construct worldviews as buffers against the existential terror of mortality. Religion, culture, ideology are examples of the psychological armor we build together. When someone inside the group deviates from those shared beliefs, it functions as a crack in the armor. And the group's response is visceral because the stakes feel, quite literally, like survival. The heretic carries what Carl Jung might call the projection shadow of the group. They are punished because they force others to confront uncertainty. The discomfort that heresy produces is the threat to consensus. Leon Festinger's research on cognitive dissonance, which means the tension we feel when things we believe contradict each other, adds another layer. When a heretical idea enters the hive mind, the system must resolve the tension. It can integrate the idea with reformation or suppress it with excommunication, or project the heretic as corrupt, deluded, or dangerous. The third option is mostly chosen when power is involved because integration would require the authority to structure to change. There is also a physiological aspect that often gets overlooked. Researcher by Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA showed that social rejection activates the same neural circuits as physical pain. The same regions of the brain that process a broken bone also process being cast out. The painful rejection of being excluded is genuinely wounding. Stephen Porg's polyvagal theory extends this further. Our social engagement system, the most evolved branch of the autonomic nervous system, regulates safety through face, voice, and co-regulation with others. Excommunication, the formal severing of belonging, is a direct assault on this system. It forces the body into fight or flight, or into a collapse and shutdown. Medieval heretics were not only spiritually condemned, but physiologically subjected to a sustained threat response that could and often did end their lives. So, scientifically speaking, heresy is a perceived threat to cognitive and social stability, processed by the body as danger and met with all defensive responses. The institutions knew this, even if unconsciously. Controlling the body was understood as controlling the mind. Western religious traditions like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism have developed a particular structure around truth. Truth was singular, and revealed only through authority. Deviation was theoretically dangerous and a threat to a community itself. Early Christian writers literally compared heresy to disease and interpreting it as something that could spread and corrupt the body of the faithful. Terms like deviation, prevention, and mercy were used to justify violence against heretics. The Cathar movement in southern France is one of the most informative examples, where a Gnostic believed a direct experience with their creator and rejected the mediated institutional structure. The church's response was the Albigensian Crusade, which was the earliest large-scale religious prosecutions in medieval Europe that was unfortunately forgotten from historical record. Not because the Cathars were threatening lives, but the structure of authority. In Islam, the concept of bid'ah, an innovation in religious practice, carries a similar logic. Rida, commonly referred to as apostasy, was treated more gravely in Islamic law. In Judaism, the cherem, which is excommunication, was the instrument of communal discipline. Its most famous modern use was against Baruch Spinoza in 1656, a decree so extreme it barred any community member from coming within 4 cubits of him. Spinoza simply walked away and continued thinking, and his ideas are now called the foundation of modern secular philosophy. The Eastern traditions handle this quite differently. In Hinduism, the Nastika tradition is often associated with atheism or materialism, rejects the authority of the Vedas, which includes the ancient Charvaka school, possibly the most thoroughgoing materialistic philosophy in world history. Yet the Charvaka thinkers were engaged in debate and not burned at the stake. The pluralism of the Brahmanical tradition could accommodate a vast range of philosophical positions. Buddhism offers the most radical departure where the category of wrong view exists. The Buddha was specific about what led away from liberation, but the correction prescribed is always practice and personal inquiry. It was never punishment or death. Taoism takes this even further. The Tao, by definition, cannot be captured in doctrine. The first line of the Tao Te Ching, the Tao can be named, is not the eternal Tao, which structurally prevents orthodoxy from calcifying. Heresy against the unnameable is a logical impossibility. So the religious difference is not whether there was conflict, but how deviation was interpreted. In Western frameworks, truth was defined and guarded. In Eastern traditions, truth was explored and realized. From the spiritual perspective, Meister Eckhart was a Dominican theologian. He wrote about direct union with the divine that was not mediated by orthodox or accessed through institutions. This direct experience was interpreted as immediate, known, and felt within the individual. He was posthumously condemned by the church. Rumi wrote ascetic poetry about the annihilation of the separate self. He was considered unorthodox in his lifetime. The great Sufi master of Al-Halajid reportedly declared, "I am the truth," and was executed for it. The Cathars understood the divine as something that could be apprehended directly and made them the target of the crusade. Joan of Arc claimed personal divine guidance, and she was burned. What they shared wasn't a doctrine, but a mode of perception that was internally direct and experiencing the divine as within and bypassing the intermediary. When you access truth on your own experience, rather than through the structure that claims authority over truth, it is defined as heresy. When J. Krishnamurti stood before the organization to declare him the real teacher and dissolved it, he said, "Truth is a pathless land. You cannot approach it by any path, religion, or any sect whatsoever." For Krishnamurti, the very act of creating an orthodoxy is the violence. Heresy is what happens when the moment you step outside the authority structure, and it is precisely that step that makes genuine inquiry possible. Alan Watts observed the historical irony with precision. Every religion is the heresy of the one that preceded it. Christianity was a Jewish heresy. Buddhism was a Hindu heresy. Protestantism was a Catholic heresy. This pattern suggests that heresy is not a deviation from the sacred. It may be the sacred's primary mechanism of self-renewal. Galileo didn't set out to be a heretic. His intentions were to look closely and carefully look at the details in question. Nikola Tesla's intention was not to be dismissed. He wanted to understand how things actually worked. As you see, the pattern is evident with the scientific method itself and was heretical in its earliest form. And so what was condemned in one century became the foundation of the next. From an ethical standpoint, an ethical teacher whose primary loyalty is to the student's liberation rather than to the institution's preservation, and would say something like this: the discomfort that a heretical idea produces in you is not evidence of the idea's wrongness. It is a map of your own attachments. Wherever you feel most threatened by deviation from orthodoxy, that is precisely the place worth investigating. Questioning is necessary and blind belief is limiting, but discernment is required. Heresy is not inherently good or bad. It's interpreted as moving away from consensus that can be examined for truth or error. Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese Zen Buddhist monk, who would put it this way: clinging to any view, orthodox or heretical, is the obstruction. The question is not which view is correct, but how tightly you are holding it. From the quantum perspective, there's a frame from quantum physics that I find genuinely interesting here. We'll look at this as a structural observation and metaphor drawn from quantum theory about how systems actually operate. Reality at the quantum level isn't fixed until it's observed. Probability is real until it collapses into a particular event. What we call consensus reality, a shared worldview we all agree on, is the dominant pattern. This is what institutions try to sustain. A heretic in this framing is simply someone whose perception doesn't collapse the wave function the same way the dominant field does. They may notice different things and weigh different possibilities. They may not do it through defiance, but through heart coherence with something the collective hasn't yet understood. Before a community renders judgment, an unconventional idea exists as genuine superposition, simultaneously valid and invalid, orthodox and heretical, transformative and destructive. The council and the trial, the excommunication are all waveforms that collapse events. The community's act of observation forces the idea into a definite state within their paradigm, but this says everything about the measuring apparatus and nothing necessary about the idea itself. Quantum tunneling is perhaps the most vivid structural parallel. Classically, a particle should not be able to pass through an energy barrier that lacks the energy to surmount. Yet it does, with a calculable probability. Heretical ideas demonstrate exactly this behavior. The idea that the Earth moves around the sun could not pass through the barrier of the church doctrine by any orthodox path, yet it tunneled through, arriving on the other side of history as unquestioned truth. As we see here, the energy barrier of authority is never as absolute as it appears. In terms of vibration and frequency, orthodoxy can be understood as a standing wave, a stable interference pattern maintained through constant reinforcement, through rituals, repetition, and communal practice. All of these sustain the pattern. A heretical idea introduces a new frequency into the system. If it's sufficiently different, it creates a destructive interference, and the standing wave begins to destabilize. The system's defensive response is to eliminate the heretic frequency before the pattern fully collapses. Paradigm shifts occur when the new frequency achieves sufficient amplitude to establish a new standing wave. a new orthodoxy which will in time face its own heretics. Ideas absolutely shift social and psychological reality, even when the physics of a direct and mental influence on the material world remain unproven. The probability landscape of what counts as a possible true statement is artificially constrained in any given era by the dominant paradigm. Heresies live at the low probability tail of that distribution. Not that they are false, but the measurement apparatus of the culture has not fully recognized them yet. When the paradigm shifts, the probability landscape reorganizes entirely. What was at the edge becomes the center. And so reality, in a meaningful sense, has changed. From a larger perspective, from what we might call the galactic or cosmic perspective, the stabilization caused by heresy is seen as evolution. Heresy requires very specific preconditions, a fixed orthodoxy, a power structure capable of enforcing it, individual consciousness capable of deviating from that group, and social consequences significant enough to be threatening. They are features of a particular stage of a particular kind of intelligence. A sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial civilization would likely encounter the concept of heresy the way we encounter any holistic practice from institutional medicine. They would recognize something their own evolutionary history has passed through with a kind of compassionate archaeological interest. Now imagine a civilization operating without linear time that perceives past, present, and future as a simultaneous landscape. They would see the full arc of Copernicus' heretical ideas into orthodox. They would see Galileo as imprisoned, then enshrined, the germ theory radicaled, then foundational. From their vantage point, the pattern would be unmistakable. They would see a species with a slight lag between its capacity for insight and for institutional integration. More advanced civilizations tend to develop what researchers call pluralistic epistemologies, which means holding multiple valid ways of knowing and held simultaneously. The mature standpoint is holding the differences without needing to eliminate it. Humanity is not fully there yet, but it is moving in that direction. From that quantum lens, heresy is not an error or interpreted as sin, but a natural expression of consciousness expanding beyond the previous understanding that contained humanity. And they might ever observe something else, that the suppression of heretical ideas may be an evolutionary step that determines whether a species advances or plateaus. Civilizations that cannot tolerate the disruption of defiant insight eventually stop generating it, and the control of any orthodoxy, whether religious, scientific, or cultural, is the slow withdrawal of the civilization's adaptive intelligence. From this view, heresy is not the problem, but the capacity to keep producing it and eventually integrating it as a sign of living intelligence. Now, why does this still matter? Modern heresy usually ends in exclusion or labeling others, in the withdrawal of belonging that doesn't fit the consensus. The mechanism is the same, but the shape of when the community decides that a perception is threatening rather than interesting is something that still persists. Across all five perspectives, what emerges is that heresy exists wherever a system divines truth and someone steps outside of it. Institutions conflate two very different things, the protection of genuine insight and the protection of power. An ethical institution would welcome the heretic as a necessary pressure test. The fact that most institutions do the opposite is quite telling about the structure itself. Heresy is never primarily about the content of the deviant belief, but the relationship between a living insight and the structure around a previous one. The institution is always, in some sense, protecting the corpse of a living experience that has already moved on. And so the question in this reflection is trying to convey is simple. What do you believe, but don't say out loud? Where did you learn that being different is wrong? What feels risky to express honestly? And just notice what comes up inside you. And no need to act. There is nothing you need to do with this. Just notice what stays with you as you watched. And if this feels like a space you want to return to, you are welcome anytime.